Thank you very much for that introduction. Yeah, buenas tardes. I mean, first and foremost, this is a snapshot generalization, and I'll probably say it about 20 times as we're going through this presentation, that it's all about individual circumstances and bespoke financial planning, and that's what we do. So first and foremost, let's jump in, go through the slides, hopefully give people a flavor of Spain and taxation and a little bit of bureaucracy, but obviously some of the nice bits as well. Okay, first of all, for those that are new to the channel, who are we? Who's Holborn Assets? Holborn Pass. Holborn Assets is a global wealth management company, so we hold multiple licenses all over the world, loads of offices as well. Obviously one here in Spain. I'm based here in Spain. I'm near Sotogrande in Andalusia. We provide asset management, pension planning, life insurance, protection, estate planning, pretty much anything to do with your financial life. And I get involved in one or two other things as well. In terms of when clients are asking me, Robin, do you know anything about solar panels? Okay, no, not a great deal. Anyway, we've got about 20,000 clients and we look after about $2.5 billion of funds. So we're not massive, but we're definitely not small. And as Richard alluded to there as well, we have a global mobility division as well. So we do a lot of kind of cross-border mobility for clients who are wanting to either move to another country in terms of residency or citizenship, and that is with the golden visas, but also with other types of visas where you're going there to become a tax resident. And I can expand on that if anybody wants any more information. Okay, so this is what we're going to run through today. Your introduction, Richard, was quite in depth. I don't think I'm going to cover everything in one session. I could probably spend an hour and a half, 2 hours just talking about tax in the correct country, never mind all the other things. But what I'd like to do today is run through some real basics, kind of fundamentals, I suppose, that people moving to Spain should get a grasp of. And when you start to get those fundamentals together, everything else kind of fits into place. You know, it's not rocket science. So first of all, paying the tax in the correct country. Let's talk a little bit about immovable assets and pensions, ISAs, other investments. If people are coming from the UK, if they're coming from the US, it would be brokerage accounts and platforms. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Spanish investment bond as well, which is relatively popular for expats in Spain, and the other options that are available. A little bit about taxes generally and what to be aware of, some changes that have happened in 2025, and then just almost a little bit of fun really, but pennies for pounds, as my mother used to say. Look after the pennies and the pounds will look after themselves. I've put a postscript here on the slide. You should speak to a professional on a one-to-one basis, and like I said, that's what we do. My contact details will be at the end of this, and what we offer is a free 30-minute session for clients to find out if we can help you or just give you some general guidance. You know, sometimes I've just helped clients out and say, well, actually you could do this yourself, or you could do that, or come back to me in 2 years when you're actually thinking of moving to Spain. Okay, so this is a little bit about like tax residency 101. You are a tax resident. This is generalism. A tax resident if you are in country for more than 183 days, or it's the center of your economic and cultural interest. Now, it gets a bit more complicated from that, particularly with the UK. You've got the statutory residence test. So you could get caught out depending on how many days you spend in the UK, etc. It's a little bit of a complicated area, but the generalisms are: you move into a new country, you've come to Spain, you've got your residence card, you're a tax resident in Spain if you're here for more than 6 months in a year. Okay, so comes up all the time, where should I be paying this tax? How does it work? It's clearly a complicated process in terms of tax, generally speaking. I mean, I personally, just hand it to my accountant for my stuff, say, look, guys, can you take care of this? Or these are my records or whatever. And I'd always I'd always encourage people to do that, even if it's for the first year or two, because unless you're speaking really good Spanish and you've got a really good background in finance, it's just a bit of a nightmare and it's just not worth the grief. If you're coming from the UK, actually globally, there is one big deal when it comes to taxing rights, and that is if it's a government funded pension, for example, then that retains taxing rights in the country of origin. Okay, and a little bit of an explanation of that is, again, if you're coming from the, or even if you're coming from the US, if you had an army pension, if you had a police pension, a healthcare pension that is being paid to you, taxing rights remain in the UK. Quick example, NHS consultant, professional, works his life in the NHS, retires, getting a pension of say 50,000 a year. He pays tax on that in the UK. So everything above his personal allowance, even though he's living in Spain. Now, how does it affect him in Spain? That is then added to his cumulative income. So he doesn't get taxed on it in Spain, but if he earned anything else in another job in Spain or another pension, he'd then be taxed at the higher rate. So, you know, quite potentially up to 45%. Allowances are generally lower in Spain. So again, depending which country you're coming from, again, particularly the UK is quite generous. It gives you lots of allowances where it's either tax-free or you're getting tax relief on various bits and pieces. Spain is generally not that. It's more focused towards family. So there's lots of incentives, you know, number of children you've got and type of home you've got. But generally speaking, incomes are lower in Spain. Therefore, the tax, you know, if you're earning a reasonable salary or a reasonable pension in the UK, you're likely to pay a little bit more in tax. And when clients come to me about, you know, where should I live or what's the best, I do it in this kind of a ranking like this, is that France is probably the most expensive in terms of tax. Portugal now is quite expensive in terms of tax because the NHR has gone, and Spain is probably somewhere in the middle, but the Rioja is a lot cheaper in Spain. So how does it work in terms of taxing? Well, again, it's the same as most countries. It's a progressive table. So again, going back to that country of origin, NHS pension is added onto that progressive table. So again, tax resident in Spain, pay your taxes in Spain. That's exactly how it should work. Now, there are agreements between multiple countries, what's called a double taxation agreement. So you shouldn't be taxed twice, but it's really important to get your ducks in order. So again, if you're leaving from the UK, and apologies if people are not necessarily from the UK, but I'll use it as an example, is make sure you tell HMRC you're leaving. So they won't be then taxing you on things that it shouldn't be taxing you on, and then you can declare them to the authorities, the Hacienda here in Spain. Now, there are some exemptions and there are some things around that. You know, property taxes are one example. And again, need to talk to people on a bespoke basis if they want to elaborate further on that. Okay, so pensions generally, PCLS, pension commencement lump sum, what people would think of as the 25% tax-free is only tax-free as a UK resident. In Spain, it's taxed as income. So you could get hit with a big nasty bill if you do that when you're a tax resident here. All income is taxed pretty much the same, again, except for those government funded ones. You don't, if you set up a pension scheme here, for example, as well, or an individual one, you don't get a great deal of tax relief or encouragement to save. I think that's probably going to change in the future because all governments want us kind of looking after ourselves a bit more. And also, again, a caveat here, I'll probably mention this 2 or 3 times. I have saved my clients tens of thousands. My best one is about 65,000 for one client in terms of NIC contributions. So make sure you're up to date. Even if you've only worked for 3 or 4 years, you can top that up to 10 years and get a pension in the future. Another topic, probably an hour and a half just on that, but that gives you a bit of a flavor of pensions. Now, If you're like me and over the years you've accumulated, life insurance and investment here and I don't know, a property there or whatever it is, there is a broad spectrum of what, again, each individual client will go. But this gives you a flavor of how, for example, ISAs are taxed in Spain. So they're taxed under what you would know as capital gains tax, so the growth on an annual basis, and it's anything between 19 and 30%, dependent on the gain. So the first 6,000 euros is at 19 and it goes up in stages. Once you get to 300,000 euros, that's when it kicks in at 30%. So that's the same for properties. When you're selling, there's no single property exemption or residential, your main residence exemption like there is in the UK. But it covers everything, even lottery winnings, which I can't believe it. But if you go and win 10 million on the big Christmas lottery here, you're going to be handing over 30% of that back to the government, which is a bit ironic, isn't it? Bank interest, and you can use the Spanish investment bond to defer those taxes substantially, ease the burden of administration, and open up the options to investment. And I'll touch on those a little bit more. One thing that comes up quite a lot is how a dividend's taxed. Perhaps if you're a business owner in the UK and you take dividends in the UK, which is very tax efficient to do so, unfortunately, as a Spanish tax resident, they're just taxed as regular income. Okay, so this is a quick table here of just how those taxes work. As you see, anything from 19 through to 300,000, it goes up to 30%. Non-residents, again, so if you're not a tax resident, you just own a property here, or you're spending 3 or 4 months a year here, so you could still have a permanent residence here in terms of your permanent residency if it was before Brexit under the withdrawal agreement, but spend less than 6 months a year. So you're still a tax resident in the UK, for example. So it's a bit more attractive for non-residents in terms of those types of taxes. So what is a Spanish compliant investment bond? It's a wrapper, basically. Big providers of these are UK institutions like the Prudential, like Utmost, like Lombard. And basically it's a wrapper where you can put your investments inside it, designed to be held 5 to 25 years. You can set it up in various ways. It's extremely tax efficient because you only pay any tax once you take a withdrawal from it. So if you don't take any withdrawals, it will just keep growing and growing without any deduction of any taxes. It's also really good in terms of simplicity because the providers of these types of things pay any tax that is due direct to the Hacienda. You don't have to worry about it. They do all the accounting for you. They'll give you a tax certificate saying this is what we've paid on your behalf. Global investments, global providers, minimum is 50,000 euros. The options are doing something like Spanish compliant investment bond or doing what we call like an open architecture, which you can still do as well. But then it gets a bit messy in terms of reporting because you have to declare your capital gain each year. You have to pay the taxes that are due, and you've got to get the correct reports to your accountant. But there are kind of pros and cons to both, and that's what I do with clients. So understand their objectives and then give them the options basically and say, okay, well, I think this is perhaps better for you, or this is, more suitable. Okay, so what about taxes? You could Google this, what are the taxes in Spain? You'll come up with a huge list of different regions. So the autonomous regions have their own individual taxes. Then you have the kind of state taxes. So it's a bit like the US where you've got state and federal. Wealth tax has been a big issue of late. It's been big in the news as well. That was basically dumped in some regions. So here in Andalusia, where I am, they did some analysis of the people that were paying wealth tax in 2022, I think it was. The 20 highest payers of wealth tax, 10 of them had left the next year. So the government quite sensibly ditched it, although then they got into trouble with the federal government. So there's now what's called the solidarity tax, but it's much, much higher. So it's 3 million per person, as opposed to the wealth tax, which was 700,000 per person. Obviously, income taxes, capital gains, we talked about, property taxes, you know, all the usual stuff. Inheritance and gift tax can be a little bit of an issue in some regions, although again, in some of those autonomous regions, it's been eradicated. Again, I'll use Andalusia, which is the biggest region. It's been completely taken away. Well, it's 99.999% allowance. And of course, you've got things like EVA, so VAT, sales taxes, which are 21%. And there are two different bands as well. There's a 10% band and a 4% band. So what's happened in 2025? Again, this is a bit of a flavor from on the ground. So we've all seen an increase in our electricity bills. So EVA went from 4% to 21. So adds, well, to myself, it added about 30, 40 euros a month. We're just being hit again with another one thanks to the blackout. And because the Red Electrica, who are the provider, that's like the national grid, have ramped up their prices. They've cut down on the amount of green energy that's been produced and moved to more, how should we say, they're not sustainable, but the more continuous, like burning gas, biofuels, etc. And that's added about another 30 or 40 euros a month to, I wouldn't say an average bill, but certainly for a medium household. They brought in the new 30% bracket for capital gains on over 300,000. Again, it's not really going to affect too many people. In terms of how Spain is doing, well, it's doing extremely well as an economy. It's booming. It's the highest in the Eurozone. It's 4 or 5 times the growth that the UK is seeing. Unemployment's to the lowest level. There's still some structural changes that need to happen because it's still quite bureaucratic for employers to hire people. And it's, again, since Brexit particularly, there's been difficulty with Brits coming over here and getting employment. 48 million people living in the country, and it's going up 600,000 a year. So again, pulling in people, not just to retire, although clearly there's a big market for that, but people like myself, working and living in the country and paying my dues to the government. And there's 21 million people actually employed, and that's rising substantially as well. So these are just silly little things I was thinking of the other day, and I thought, what would I do and what would I look at if I, wanted to save a few pounds here and save a few pennies there? Obvious things. We're in a hot country. Energy contracts, solar, ground source heat pumps, air source heat pumps, all that kind of stuff is worth looking at. Lots of grants around for people to do that. Even still as well, you get a reduction on your EB. EB is your kind of like a council tax. So there are various schemes going, again, dependent on which region that you're living. Look at your mobile contracts. I know people who've kept their UK number for like 5 years, paying 50 quid a month, when they could have had I use Lobster, I put this here, English speaking services in English, because my Spanish isn't great, and it costs me 12 euros a month or something. And I can call the US. I can call my clients in the US on their mobile for free. It's a bit ridiculous, really, as obviously I can in the UK. Obviously, in terms of payments, fluctuations, Richard mentioned right at the beginning, things like smart currency. It's absolutely essential to look at those payments and how they're being made and transferring into euros, getting the best rate, because you will save money. You'll save a lot of money by doing it through a currency exchange like smart currency versus your bank. Your bank love people to transfer money. Guess why? Because they're making a massive margin on it. Another one that just hit me as well is, to do, make sure when you're living here, you keep on top of your address notifications. I've now known 3 people who have had their bank accounts embargoed. They've gone to find out why, and it's because of speeding fines, or it's fines for late payment of taxes or something like this. But the authorities out here don't come to you and say, look, you're out of order, you've got a speeding fine or a parking fine. It's up to you to know it. they will write to you, and they'll write to you at their last address. And guess what? Not many people update it. So, for example, there's now the apps. You've got the DGT app and also the app as well. Another thing in terms of costs, money, generally, life insurance. Life insurance in Spain goes up every year. It's a typical thing run by the banks. They make an absolute fortune out of it. And every year, the cost of your life insurance will go up. If you come to an international financial services provider like ourselves, we obviously deal with the big international companies, and it's generally fixed and it doesn't change in terms of cost and obviously coverage as well. So that's something to look at. And the reason I mention that is that when you buy a property in Spain, you're forced to take the bank's life insurance for the first year, but only for the first year. So that's worth looking at. And sometimes people forget about it, just let it roll on. And it's like, wow, that's getting expensive after they've been paying it for 4 or 5 years. And then just things like subscriptions. It's a world thing, isn't it now? You know, we've got subscriptions for Netflix and Amazon and Prime and I don't know, whatever it is. And there's plenty of apps out there now that can do that for you, but just have a look at that. I just think subscriptions are getting to the stage of where it's almost like another utility bill. Certainly if you're running a small business or you're self-employed and you need something to do this, you need something to do that as well. Okay, again, I always put this on the slides, some kind of obvious, perhaps, I don't know. In my world, nothing's ever obvious, I don't think. Seek out some smart currency advice to minimize that currency risk. So the guys at Smart Currency, you'll have an individual account manager. They can, for example, hedge that out. You could fix that in the future if you're buying a property, you're selling a property. Talk to them. Talk to us or any other regulated, qualified financial services company before you move. About 6 months is what I usually say. And that will probably give you a chance to maybe get some other things in order, start the process with, things like HMRC, etc. Sell your main residence before becoming a tax resident, and that will avoid that capital gains tax on your UK property, which is likely, quite a substantial amount. That's a little bit obvious. Now, some clients don't want to sell it for whatever reason, which I fully understand, but it will then become a liability in terms of any income that comes from that, less UK property taxes. I guess that one is always a difficult one. People are tied to their family home, but perhaps if they're, thinking it's going to be a long-term move, it makes a lot more sense. And obviously freeing up the capital to then purchase something in Spain, which is generally a lot cheaper. Consider liquidating assets. If you go back to that first slide, I think it was the second or third slide, about taking some advice about liquidating those before you leave, and then look at putting them in equivalent tax wrappers in Spain. And again, taking PCLS before your pensions. Take advice from a regulated pension provider on that one. Again, might sound obvious. Tell all the institutions, tell your life insurance company in the UK that you're moving to Spain. Here's my new address. Thank you, Aviva. And can you just confirm I'm still covered in the European Union, which you will be 100% of the time. But it's good to have that surety. Complete your HMRC notice of leaving. Tell them you're going. Bye, I'm off. And that they will then provide you, well, they won't be taxing you in future. They will expect that you're not going to file any more online taxes unless you have some other kind of liability, like property, for example. And also update your will when you get to Spain. The Spanish system actually is really, really good, but you need to speak Spanish. So, for example, I took my lawyer along with me. Pretty standard will in English, in Spanish. But the great thing about the system is everybody's wills are logged digitally and centrally. So any lawyer, any government institution with the right credentials can access that in the future. So there's no, oh, my will's with my solicitor in Wigan, or, oh, no, I moved. No, I'm in Brighton. did we do that in Brighton? I can't remember. What did you give it to your sister or did you give it to your grandmother? I can't remember. None of that. So it's a great system. But also, again, coming to kind of end of life stuff, is consider things like IHT liability, estate planning. There's been some big changes in the UK. Is it next year that we're moving to a residency-based IHT system, but you need to have been away from the country for a certain length of time. Again, I could probably talk about that for 2 hours on its own, but it'll bore everybody to death. But if you've got something like that, again, QR code at the end, give you my contact details, and you can hook up and have a chat. Those are my details. So QR code if you're technologically minded and scan that, which it just seems to be the way to go nowadays. My email ID, so robin.thornton@holbornassets.com. That's my mobile phone number with WhatsApp on there as well. So, if you want to just ping me a simple message and we can go from there.